Hey, it's Bob. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Today, we're going to talk about economic espionage. Come on, let's talk. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk, a topic that I'm versed in, and I think is very important to private companies across the U.S., even some government organizations, is economic espionage. What is it? Who's doing it? What's going on? How do we talk about it?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this topic today.
Katie, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, but I'm looking forward to this conversation
How come?
because, well, I know that you, correct me if I'm wrong, but were head of the counterintelligence office at the FBI for
Yep,
years.
sure was.
Was the insider threat program part of that when you were there?
Back then it was. I don't know where it's at nowadays, but insider threat, counterintelligence, counter espionage, all that stuff was there.
Yeah, but I don't think people really understand what that is and what the difference is between, government espionage stories and what you see in the movies to, kind of what happens every day.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I can break it down real quick. I mean, you just need to look at traditional espionage like spies. I used to call them spies. So like they're real spies. That is when somebody is in a position of trust inside the United States government, usually as a clearance, secret, top secret, whatever, and they've been tasked or on their own, they're trying to steal classified information and provide it to a foreign power. It could be anybody. Pick a country. It's somebody else than the United States, and that's governed under very specific laws, regulations, and rules, and everything. And that happens way more than anybody has any idea. But maybe we talk about that on another segment. But when we really talk about economic espionage, it really much more affects the private sector and about how that's being stolen out of the private sector and really, who's doing it. I think that's the bigger thing, quite frankly. When we look at, potentially any type of economic espionage, you're really looking at trade secret information, quite frankly. We can get into intellectual property and stuff like that, but you're really looking at trade secret information that companies have that they're trying to protect. And, in the private sector, it could be a major university, it could be a company, it could be whoever, and some foreign country is trying to obtain that information.
Help me understand that better. Like, how is the United States a target? And
Well, I mean, I think any country is a target. The United States is a huge target because we're leaders in technologies, we're leaders in a lot of things. But I think the reality is when you're looking at any type of country that wants to get that information, the targets become targets of opportunity, whether they're in the government or they're in private sector. And really, again, it goes back to not so much classified information at all. It goes back to what is or what does that company, entity, or whatever have that that country might need. And if it's categorized as a trade secret and anybody's trying to get that from that company, whether you're a foreign power or the employee itself, then it becomes a violation of economic espionage law.
so I think you talked about it. It depends on what the greatest opportunity is. You have technology embedded across every sector of our economy. Is
Yeah.
the tech sector more at risk than others, or
No, so it'd probably be good to just kind of to wrap around what exactly economic espionage is, and then we can hit, because the reality is, I think things are going so quickly anymore in a variety of sectors. In the old days, when I say old days, 20 years ago, and we'll hit some of the countries that I think, quite frankly, are the major offenders in this. It could have been C4ISR technology, command and control communications for warfighters. It could have been banking information back in the old days. Iran was big into that.
Mhm.
It could be miniaturization technology. It could be anything. And the thing is, what people need to understand, most of this technology, when it's being developed in either academic settings, in labs, or in the universities themselves, or even in companies, it's probably not classified at all. It's not until it's put together someplace in a lab or a hangar someplace that when you get the whole package, it becomes classified. But the key is that the company actually has to put protections around it to make it a trade secret item. Otherwise, even though you mark it trade secret, the courts really don't look at it like that. But let's just talk about what really is economic espionage. I mean, back in 1996, there was a thing that was established called the Economic Espionage Act. And really what that established was, and it keyed off a trade secret information that if a company inside the United States developed a trade secret, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's whatever the keys of the kingdom is for your company, that you think, hey, this is going to make my company, a $20 billion company eventually, that if anybody's trying to procure that unauthorized and feed any of that into a foreign agent or a foreign power, it violates that act. Now, since then, there's all kinds of like in betweens between it. You'll hear people talk about, is that your intellectual property? Do you have IP? Do you have this? Do you have that? That may or may not be a trade secret inside your organization. So if somebody actually steals intellectual property, can they be prosecuted for it? Yep, absolutely. Is it under the Economic Espionage Act? Maybe, may not be, probably not. The hardest piece of this, Katie, quite frankly, in my experience, you can identify what a trade secret is. You can determine whether a company's put the right, prerequisites around it to keep it safe, guards, locks, keys, gates, whatever, stuff in the computers. You can even probably most likely identify the individual, whether that person's from the US or another country. It gets real hard when you try to define, did it go to a foreign power? That's the hardest part of it. I think what companies need to understand nowadays, which makes this much harder in our current world, is that, it's a global business environment. And big companies, whether it's drug companies, technology companies, as you brought up, even manufacturing companies that build whatever it is, I don't really care what it is. It's a global business environment. Everybody's in Russia, everybody's in China, everybody's in Europe, everybody's in the former Yugoslavian countries. Matter of fact, most countries have, if you look at the Rolodex of employees, some multinational companies that I've worked for doing consulting work for, I mean, they're in 150 countries,
Yeah.
160 countries. And so a lot of it, man, this goes back to your point about insider threat. And maybe we do a show on that, just
Yeah.
all of insider threat, because it's a big deal. I ran it, I bet you, for 10 years
Mm.
in the government for a long time. And that's a whole nother art. But the reality is, you may have that person within that's either disgruntled or working with somebody that's trying to take your information. And that's really economic espionage.
So when you identify economic espionage and an individual associated with it, are they prosecuted for this?
In the old days, I would tell you it was very hard. I think I looked up some stats on this before we talked, and these are just open source stats off of Google or whatever. But, and by the way, I wouldn't believe any of these stats, and I'll tell you why. It just gives you a rough number. I think since the establishment of the act, all the agencies combined in the federal government, I think, primarily the FBI, but, says maybe there's 280, 300 cases of this. And somewhere in there, maybe 350, 400 people prosecuted. And that's open source stuff off of Google. I would tell you that's probably all wrong. And the reason I say that, and a perfect example, like in a real world, if you want to go back to an example that I kind of use this stuff all the time, Al Capone was a bad guy. The FBI put Al Capone in jail. Al Capone killed a whole bunch of people and did a lot of stuff wrong. What did the FBI put Al Capone in jail for? Tax evasion.
Yeah, not murder.
No, not murder, not RICO, not, a million other things that we could have put, we couldn't prove it, right? So you do what you got to do and you put him in jail for tax evasion. And I go back to what I said earlier, and a lot of this is just so hard to prove, but those stats are not capturing, most likely, in my opinion, and I have no inside knowledge on this, all the people that different agencies went into and companies asked their help on. Is this somebody stealing our trade secret, whether it's economic espionage or not? They probably identified and prosecuted people for other violations that wouldn't trip off that economic espionage. So when you're looking at the stats, I think most business leaders would go, well, why do I care? I mean, there's 300 people, 400 people have been prosecuted in, 20, 30 years. Like, why do I care? Like, that's not going to affect my business. What I would say is you're wrong. Like, that's not the real stats. That's the real stats, in my opinion, for the actual statute. But that doesn't mean, just like going back to my Al Capone scenario, that there hasn't been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people prosecuted for other things outside of that exact statute.
So many more incidents going on, and these people have been arrested and removed, but they've been prosecuted for something different.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And it's much harder, I think, nowadays to be looking at the statistical things. Like, yeah, I talk about this all the time when you and I talk about cyber. Like, I don't care how many breaches that they released that happened last year in this country, it doesn't touch it. It's like 1% of the real breaches. And the reason I'll give you another perfect example, relating it back to economic espionage. When I first came out of the bureau and I worked at a large firm and I ran a huge cyber incident response practice globally. I ran that for 3 years before I moved on to another company. We did roughly, I don't know, 800 breaches a year,
Mm.
a couple thousand, maybe a little more in 3 years. That's two breaches a day, every day. I spoke to the FBI one time,
And how did that go? Why
one
didn't
time
you
in
call him
3 years.
back?
Well, I mean, they really couldn't help me, and we'll get off on a tangent on
Yeah.
cyber, which I don't want to do. I'm relating it back to economic espionage, but my point is, there's no way they have the actual count of how many breaches are going
Yeah.
on in this country. And by the way, we could talk about that in a later episode, but this is part of the reality. And so some companies will prosecute these people, some companies will not. Some companies want the federal law enforcement or state law enforcement working with them on this. Some companies do not. And then when you get involved in it, the reality is you may or may not be able to prove those segments of the violation that you could prosecute that person for under the Economic Espionage Act. So you're prosecuting them for something different and it'll never show up. And my only reason for bringing all this to the table is I think this is a huge problem inside the United States. I saw it in my government time. I've seen it in multiple companies across the United States, in the last, 10, 11 years working out in the private sector. And I just don't think people pay it enough attention. Like, I really think you need to look at this, especially if you're a big company and you've got a lot going on. I think it happens way more than anybody has any idea.
So who are the biggest, I don't know, offenders? Like who are the countries that are targeting the United States and
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. First of all, it could be somebody within your own company just doing it to make a buck, or they're pissed off and they're disgruntled, no different than regular spies. We'll talk about that later, but it could be them. But honestly, in my opinion, over the years working in the private sector and the government, it's three or four major country powers that want to stay mano a mano, both economically, technologically, militarily with the United States. And, it's no surprise. China, I think Russia, I think North Korea, Iran, and people are going to go, what does China want in my company? I don't make anything in my company that China wants. And when I say China, I'm not talking about the men and women of China. I'm talking about the government of China. And I think you got to step back and look at it like I just said, because they want to be lockstep with the United States in anything. And so when you take it back to what I was saying, most stuff that, eventually becomes classified isn't classified when somebody's stealing it, right? You're stealing it out of a university, you're stealing it out of a company. And I'm looking at this, what we're talking about specifically from companies. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, you need to trust me on this. If you got this state of the art, AI, state of the art technology, whatever, quantum, I don't care. That's kind of the vogue things nowadays.
Mhm.
And by the way, I think it's going to eclipse what's going on in our lives. And that's something we definitely need to talk about. But the difference is these big countries, China, Russia, Iran, Korea, North Korea specifically, they don't just use private sector resources. They're going to use every asset they have. And so that means their intelligence services, that means their military services, that means people that they recruited, people that they've blackmailed, people that they're extorting. This isn't a gentleman's game. This is what a lot of people I don't think get with this. Like, the person that is tasked to steal or acquire these technologies may be doing it because they want to, maybe doing it because they're trying to save their family, maybe doing it because they're working for a foreign power. And I got news for you. If they're a trained intelligence agent that is sitting in your company and been there for 10 years because you just know him as Bob now, um, it's hard to stop because it's not like some guy off the street. These people are trained. They're trained before they go, and then they sit there. And in that time, they're acquiring access to different parts of the company. And you have to be prepared for this. And I think the big offenders, like I said, obviously are China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Trust me, there's other countries, but they're the ones that really have a vested interest for different reasons. I mean, China and Russia definitely want to stay lockstep with us. Iran, North Korea, totally different. And they focus a lot on banking. As a matter of fact, you've seen a lot of articles in the last several years of where, Korea stole billions and billions of dollars from banks. And by the way, what happens? Nothing. They
Yeah.
don't care. I can tell you when I was in the bureau, I met so many times with my counterparts in different countries' services and have a conversation about economic espionage because something's going on and we need to talk to them, and they don't give a shit.
They don't think it's
No,
wrong necessarily,
no.
like, that's their state goal.
It's their state goal and they don't care. I mean, they don't even acknowledge that the law's a law. And
Mhm.
by the way, we've arrested people all over the world for this, and they don't care. And I think people need to understand that. You've got trained people that are paid to go after this stuff, and they're sort of like a terrier dog. You can tell it no, it's going to come right back in a minute, and it's going to do the same thing. You can whack it in the nose, and it's going to go away. It's going to come right back again. The tenacity is never going to stop. If you've got something they want, they're going to put the full resources of their people against it. And I think people need to understand that. Like, this isn't like a, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. If they're going after it, it's for a reason. And nowadays, when you throw in not just the human assets of people and, intelligence companies, corporations, and entities, but you throw in cyber, you throw in AI, you throw in quantum, you throw in all this stuff that's coming a million miles an hour, it's really hard. And I think the biggest thing is to educate the private sector on this is real. And if you've got a big company, you need to be watching out for this stuff.
So you're a big company. You've spent millions of dollars in research and development to get you to where you are. You have a workforce, you're building, you're innovating, you're doing all of the hard work to bring these new capabilities forward. Or you're even as a startup, right? And you're pouring everything into this to get it off the ground. How do you respond to this threat as a private sector company?
I think you gotta one, realize it's real. Two, as the boss or the bosses, you need to know where the keys to your kingdom are, and not just the ones you've got right now that you're going to market with, but what's the ones we're in R&D
Mhm.
and the development. Because let's face facts. I don't care how big of a company you are. Say you've spent 50 billion in R&D on anything, a widget, a drug. I don't care what it is, and you've spent 10 years doing this, invested thousands of people, millions of man hours, and I steal it.
Mhm.
And 2 weeks from now, another company in another country uh, takes all that research and manufactures whatever that is, the widget, the drug, it doesn't matter what it is. And now they beat you to the market. They've undercut your price. They've captured all of those billions of dollars in R&D. And guess what? You're in trouble,
Mhm.
right? You are in big trouble. And it happens that fast. And so I think you need to know where the keys to your kingdom are, because I'll tell you, 99% of the time when I talk to CEOs or chairmen, and I'll say, hey, what's the biggest thing about your company? What are you most afraid of? You know what they say?
What?
My brand. That's it. And I go, yeah, okay, well, okay, that was the 2-second conversation. Yeah, I got that. But no, what are you really afraid of?
Mhm.
Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? And I'm not, by the way, I'm not embellishing this. 99% say my brand. It's almost like this thing when you're getting interviewed on TV. What's your first thing that's going to come out of your mouth? Like, yeah, I get your brand, but
Yeah.
what's the keys to your kingdom? And by the way, a lot of CEOs of really giant companies, they're more visionary, right? So then go to the president, go to the COO, go to the
But
CFO.
what's gonna harm you the most if it's taken or
Well,
damaged,
not
destroyed,
just,
stolen?
yeah, that's right. Whether it's any of that or what are you looking for in front of this? Because I will guarantee you, if you have the right team of people that know what they're doing and you show them and give them access and let them poke around in the keys to your kingdom, there's probably somebody there right now.
Mhm.
And they've probably been there. It's not the new guy or new gal. And I just think the reality of it, people need to understand that this is very real. It's not like something out of a book, and it happens all the time. And just because the stats are low, all I'm saying in my experience, and I could be wrong nowadays, I don't think I am, that it doesn't matter what the stats say. It's probably way worse. Go back to the cyber example, right? I mean, I did thousands of breaches. I talked to the Bureau one time. I love the FBI. I love everybody in it. I didn't need to. And by the way, there's thousands of cyber companies out there. So how clear of a picture does the FBI or anybody have on cyber? I don't know. I'm not there anymore, but I know I do a lot of it. I don't talk to anybody. Why? Because it's not up to me. It's up to the board. It's up to the CEO. It's up to the company. And it's the same way of economic espionage. And all I'm trying to say is when you're looking at this from a company perspective, it's prolific. And you have to assume that if you have stuff inside your company, I don't care if you're a little teeny tiny company or a gigantic company, there's probably somebody looking at it.
How does this apply in an academic setting? You know, you have people coming from around the
Yeah, that's a
world
good point.
into these academic institutions. They're studying, they're doing research over
Yep.
here.
Well, look, everything's a business nowadays, and I've never worked at a university or anything, but I've been to a million of them, and I've investigated a lot of stuff, and everything's a business. So I don't care what higher learning institute you are. I don't care if you're a higher learning lab, academic. It doesn't matter. Even if you're a government institution that you'll let visiting scholars from other countries come into and share research. Because I will tell you the one thing with academics or very high science, everybody wants to communicate with everybody, right?
Mhm.
Because they want insights, because they want to share that and develop something new. And everything's a business. And these college and universities make money off of bringing students in from
Lots and lots of
lot
money.
tens of billions of dollars a year. If you add up all the universities, it's a big business. Yeah, I mean, I pray that most of them are worried about the academics, which they say they are, but it's a big business. And all I got to say is if you got somebody coming into the country going to a very specific part of a very specific academic institute that has very specific ties to, warfighter or a government or cutting edge technology, and they're working on their third PhD, maybe you need to ask yourself a question. I don't know that we do that. And I'm not even saying as government, I'm talking from a private sector. Um, because who else would you put there? That's who I'd put there. And I think the academic community, I don't know that they look at it like I do. And by the way, this has nothing to do with the government. This is just me trying to protect people that have businesses or companies in the United States, right? Good American trying to help. But I don't know that people do that. And I think academic institutions are actually highly sought after by everybody. I'm not even talking about countries, just everybody, because a lot of what develops in the really cutting edge technology starts there. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just the way it is nowadays.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, I think 2 points come to mind. 1, this stuff can be very hard to prove. But, 2, maybe these countries are sending people over to conduct and ultimately lead to economic espionage. How do you stop it? How do you vet it? How do you make sure you're on the safe side? Um, I think it's a difficult challenge.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I just give you one quick real life example. I mean, and by the way, this has nothing to do. I mean, you could apply it to countries, but this is what I'm talking about. It goes back to your point you just made. So, 30 years ago, uh, when I was doing all this stuff for the government, state, federal, whatever, if I wanted to meet you or if I wanted to find out about you, I had to go bump into you. I mean, it's just a fact. There was no cell phones, there was no internet, there was no pagers, there was no nothing. So for me to actually go find out and try to get Katie to give me information, I had to go bump into Katie someplace. And within a few seconds, I had to get Katie to want to talk to Bob. And if you just look about it nowadays with everything that's gone on in AI and social media and how companies publicize just about everything about their employees anymore, I don't need any of that. And so then if I ever do decide to bump into Katie, I know everything about you. I know where you grew up, how many kids you got. I know where you went to work. I know I can make that conversation seem seamless. And by the way, I don't mean in person. I could do it online. I could do social media chats. I could do however I want to do it. And this has nothing to do with countries, but I will tell you, you can apply it to everything. I'm just talking about normal people. And so when you apply that now to a company and you're trying to keep your stuff safe, you don't even necessarily have to worry about the people inside. You need to worry about everybody because is there somebody trying to get a hold of somebody inside that isn't who they're saying they are because I want to get access to Katie because Katie sits where I want to be. And when I bump into her or him or whoever, whether it's through social media or whatever, it's just easy because all of a sudden I know you like cats or I know you hate cats or you like dogs or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. And I think as a person running a company nowadays, when it comes to economic espionage, you got to pay attention to this
Mhm.
because it's the way it is.
Yeah, and even with the cyber example, so much stuff gets stolen and, you know, this is a government example, but it reminds me of the OPM breach and stealing all that, information about the government workforce that was in that database.
No, I'm very familiar with that. I was in charge of that when it happened, and I can tell you millions and millions and millions and millions of people's identity. My stuff's all gone. I mean, that's where everybody goes in the government, and you wonder what are they doing with it. I have my own ideas on that, but the reality is this is something I think economic espionage is something that everybody in the corporate world need to pay attention to, and they need to realize it's real. You can have big picture foreign powers doing it, but you can also have Joe Blow inside your company, and it's something you need to talk about. I think it was a good conversation. You know.
I do too.
Hey, so thanks for coming back to Let's Talk. Looking forward to seeing you guys again soon. Don't forget, man, peace, love each other. We need it. Thanks.